My name is Michael, and I've been a detective in a small town in North Carolina for a long time. My entire career, I've dreamed of a big case, an investigation that would take me to the next level. But I never imagined that the most terrifying case would start with a simple diary found in an abandoned house. The house where the diary was found had long been notorious. Neighbors reported strange noises and flickering lights at night. One fall, we received a call from teenagers who decided to spend the night in the house for fun. One of them found an old diary under a floorboard in one of the rooms. Scared half to death, he brought it to the police station. I opened the diary and immediately realized that these were not just any old entries. The diary belonged to a woman named Elizabeth. Her neat handwriting and detailed entries indicated a meticulous person. The first pages seemed ordinary, telling about everyday life, but already on the 5th page, I came across an entry that made me wary. Today, he was watching me again. I feel his presence. My name is Michael, and I have worked as a detective in a small town in North Carolina for a long time. All my career, I dreamed of a big investigation that would take me to a new level. But I could not have thought that the most terrible case would begin with a simple diary found in an abandoned house. The house in which the diary was found has long been notorious. Neighbors talked about strange noises and flickering lights at night. One fall, we received a call from teenagers who decided to spend the night in this house for fun. One of them found an old diary under the floor in one of the rooms. Scared to death, he brought it to the station. I opened the diary and immediately realized that these were not just any old entries. The diary belonged to a woman named Elizabeth. Her neat handwriting and detailed notes indicated a pedantic person. The first pages seemed ordinary, told about everyday life, but already on the 5th page I came across an entry that made me wary. Today, he was watching me again. I feel his presence. This man is not from our town. He is a stranger. I couldn't sleep all night thinking about this diary. The next morning, I returned to the office and continued reading. The records got weirder and weirder. Elizabeth described how the stranger watched her from the darkness, how his gaze pierced her through and through. She began to lock the doors and windows, but it did not help. The stranger always found a way to be there. I decided to start my investigation with a house inspection. My partner Tom and I went to the old house trying to find any evidence. The house was in a dilapidated state with collapsed walls and windows rattling in the wind. We found some old photos, but nothing that could help with the investigation. I went back to my journal. Elizabeth talked more and more about her fear. She wrote about how she began to see shadows in every corner, how a stranger was getting closer and closer to her. And then one day, the recordings suddenly stopped. The last note was dated several months ago. "I know he's coming for me today. This is my last note. If you're reading this, he's already found me." We began to check all possible traces. Tom found old newspapers that mentioned the disappearance of a woman named Elizabeth Martin. She disappeared without a trace, and her body was never found. We turned to the archives and found more information about her and her family. It turned out that Elizabeth lived alone and had no relatives who could help with the investigation. Our search led us to several strange cases of missing women in the area. In all cases, a similar stranger was described who followed the victims before their disappearance. We began to suspect that we were dealing with a serial killer who has been active in our town for many years. Tom found some old photos that were taken at a local park. In one of them, we saw Elizabeth, and in the background, there was a stranger looking directly into the camera. His face was partially covered by a hat, but the look was unforgettable. We started looking for more photos from this park, hoping to find new evidence. The search led us to an old photo studio that had been closed for a long time. The owner of the studio, an old man named Henry, remembered that this stranger often came to him to develop films. Henry kept all the old negatives, and we decided to check them out. Among the hundreds of pictures, we found a few that showed a stranger with various women who had disappeared. We could not find any information about this stranger. He seemed to appear out of nowhere and disappeared just as suddenly. I began to feel that we were dealing with a very dangerous man who knew how to cover his tracks. My heart sank with fear every time I thought that he might still be around watching us. A few weeks after starting our investigation, we received a new challenge. A young woman named Amanda disappeared in a nearby town. Her friends said that lately she felt that someone was watching her. I immediately remembered Elizabeth's records and realized that our maniac was on the loose again. Tom and I began checking all the calls Amanda had received before she disappeared. One of the phone numbers caught our attention. It was an unknown number from which calls came without words. We decided to trace this number and find out who was on the other end of the line. Our technicians found out that the number was registered in the name of John Smith, but this lead turned out to be false. We contacted the company that provided communication services and found out that the number was bogus. Our maniac clearly knew how to cover his tracks, and that made him even more dangerous. My life turned into a complete nightmare. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Elizabeth and Amanda begging for help. I knew I had to find this maniac before he found another victim. But every day I felt that we are further from the truth. One of the new victims, Marta, left a mark that we couldn't ignore. She often went to the same cafe, and we decided to check the surveillance footage. In one of the videos, we saw a stranger sitting at a nearby table watching her. His face was hidden, but his demeanor was familiar. Tom and I began to analyze all the possible paths that our suspect could have taken. One of the witnesses recalled that on the day of Marta's disappearance, he saw a car parked at a broken traffic light near the cafe. This was our only clue, and we decided to check out the area. While looking for new evidence, we came across an old workshop that had been defunct for a long time. The owner of the workshop said that he had seen a stranger come there several times at night. We decided to search and found some strange items, old photos, notes, and even a diary similar to the one we found in Elizabeth's house. After opening the diary, we were shocked. It belonged to our maniac. In it, he described his crimes in detail, but without names and dates. It was a real nightmare on paper, and I began to understand that we were dealing with a very dangerous and sick person. While we were studying the diary, new reports of disappearances came in. Each disappearance was similar to the previous one. I felt like we were racing against time, trying to find the maniac before he struck again. Each new victim became another reminder of our responsibility. I felt helpless. We had a lot of evidence, but no concrete lead that would lead us to the maniac. The diary was full of gruesome details, but it gave us no clue as to his identity. I knew we had to act fast, but I felt like we were wandering in the dark. One day, a woman named Sarah came to us. She claimed to have seen a stranger matching our description. She said that he had come to her store several times and always looked at her as if he knew something that others didn't. Her story was so creepy that I couldn't help but believe her. Sarah said the stranger had been coming to her store for the past few months, but had never bought anything. He just looked at her and smiled. She decided he was just a strange customer until she saw his picture in a newspaper where he was wanted as a missing person. We began to check all the places where the stranger could appear. Sarah gave us a description of his appearance, and we decided to contact all the local shops and establishments for help. We knew this was our only chance to find him before he found another victim. One day, returning home late at night, I felt that someone was watching me. I started to quicken my pace, but the shadows around me seemed to close. Suddenly, a man came out from around the corner, and I realized that it was him. His eyes looked at me with cold calculation, and I felt that now it would all end. I stopped and looked the stranger in the eyes. He didn't move, just smiled, and I realized I had no choice. I slowly reached for the gun, but it suddenly disappeared into the shadows. I returned home, but all this time I felt his presence. He was playing with me, and I knew it. The next day, I decided to discuss the incident with Tom. We realized that the maniac knows about our investigation and is trying to break us psychologically. We increased security at all possible places where he could appear and began to look for new leads. We received an anonymous call. The voice on the other end of the line said he knew where the maniac lived. I immediately went to the indicated address. It was an old house on the outskirts of town. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, but inside we found signs that someone had lived here. During the search, we found a secret entrance to the basement. It was dark and damp there. I went inside and saw the walls covered with photographs of the victims. This was his lair. I knew we were close to solving it, but he was still on the loose. We decided to set a trap. It was announced in the local news that we have important evidence and we are close to an arrest. That should have gotten his attention. We expected him to make a mistake and reappear. We waited for several days to no avail. But one evening, when I was starting to lose hope, I received a message from the security guard. He saw someone approaching our station and trying to get inside. We immediately went to the place. Seeing us, the stranger started to run away. We chased him all over town, but he was too fast. In the end, we lost him in the dark streets. But now we knew he was getting nervous and starting to make mistakes. The next morning, a woman named Laura came to us. She said that she worked as a nurse and recognized the stranger as her former patient. He was treated for serious mental disorders and was very dangerous. She gave us his name, Mark Raymond. We found Mark Raymond's medical records. It turned out that he suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and was released from the hospital several years ago. He lived alone and never had contact with his relatives. This explained his strange behavior and the lack of information about him. While investigating, we came across an old letter written by Mark. In it, he described his terrible fantasies and desire to harm others. This letter was the real proof of his illness and the danger he represented. We realized that Mark was hiding in abandoned buildings on the outskirts of the city. We organized an operation to search all possible hiding places. Eventually, we came across one of them and found traces of his presence. Tom and I went to the last place where we knew Mark could be hiding. It was an old warehouse. We went inside and started searching. Suddenly, Mark approached us from the darkness. His eyes shone with hatred. Mark rushed at us with a knife. Tom and I barely had time to dodge. A fierce struggle began. Mark was strong and agile, but we knew we couldn't let him get away. In the end, we were able to disarm him and detain him. Mark was arrested and taken to the station. During interrogation, he confessed to all his crimes. His cruelty and indifference to his victims was astounding. He showed no remorse. The arrest of Mark Raymond put an end to his bloody activities. The city breathed a sigh of relief, and Tom and I felt that our mission had been accomplished. But inside remained a bitter residue of the fact that so many innocent lives had been lost. After this incident, I decided to leave the police force and start a new life. I opened my own private detective agency and continued to help people, but in a different role. Tom stayed with the police and became one of the best detectives in our town. Many years have passed, but the memory of this case still haunts me. I often think of Elizabeth, Amanda, and other victims of Mark Raymond. Their faces forever remained in my memory as a reminder that evil can lurk around any corner. My new life as a private investigator was much more relaxed, but I sometimes felt nostalgic for the adrenaline rush and challenges of police work. One day, a woman named Jennifer came to me. She was scared and asked for help to find her missing husband. Jennifer said her husband, Adam, went missing 2 days ago. He went to work and never came back. The police had already started an investigation, but she felt more help was needed. I agreed to take on this case, although I knew it might not be easy. I started by checking out Adam's place of work. His colleagues said that on the day of his disappearance, he behaved normally and did not express any fears. However, one colleague recalled seeing Adam talking to a stranger outside the office. This stranger seemed suspicious to him. I turned to the security guard working in the office and asked to see the surveillance footage. In one of the videos, I saw Adam talking to a man in a hat. His face was hard to make out, but I had a feeling it might be the key to the solution. I started digging deeper into Adam's past. It turns out that he used to work for a large corporation, but was fired under mysterious circumstances. His former colleagues said that he had a conflict with one of the managers who threatened him. This could be the motive for the disappearance. I decided to meet with this manager, Charles. He was a wealthy and influential man who did not want to associate with me. But I knew that something important was hidden behind his silence. I began to follow him, hoping to find some evidence. One evening, I saw Charles meeting the same stranger from the video. They were talking in the parking lot near one of the nightclubs. I took a few photos and decided to follow the stranger, hoping he would lead me to Adam. A stranger led me to an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. I carefully entered inside and began to search the premises. In one of the rooms, I found Adam, tied and frightened. He was weak, but alive. I released him and we quickly left the building. Adam said that Charles blackmailed him, forcing him to keep quiet about some illegal transactions in the corporation. When Adam refused, he was kidnapped and held captive. He was ready to testify against Charles, and I knew this was our opportunity to stop him. Charles was arrested and the case was taken to court. Adam testified, and Charles was found guilty of kidnapping and blackmail. His influence could not save him from justice. Adam and Jennifer were finally able to return to their normal lives. After this success, my agency became popular. More and more people came to me with requests for help. One day, a man named Henry came to me. He said that his sister, Emily, had disappeared several months ago, and the police had been unable to find any trace of her. I agreed to take on the case and began by getting to know Emily's family. Her mother and father were desperate and ready to do anything to find their daughter. They said that Emily had been acting strange lately and was avoiding talking about her work. I started checking Emily's circle of acquaintances. Her colleagues said that she was very secretive and did not talk about her personal life. However, one of them mentioned that Emily often met with a man named Jack, who was her old friend. I decided to find Jack and talk to him. He was quite open and told that Emily had been very frightened lately and was asking for his help. She talked about a man who was following her, but did not give any details. Jack remembered that Emily had mentioned several times about some documents she had hidden in her house. We went to her apartment together and began to search. In one of the rooms, we found an old safe. Inside were documents that indicated she worked for a large financial company. The documents we found indicated that Emily had access to very important information. She was an analyst and worked on identifying financial fraud. Her last project involved a large company suspected of money laundering. I realized that Emily could be a target because of her job. I began to investigate this company and found that its management had ties to the criminal world. They were ready to do anything to hide their crimes, and Emily could become their victim. I decided to go further and contacted some of my old acquaintances from the police. They helped me gather more evidence against this company. We learned that Emily had been kidnapped and was being held in one of the underground houses that belonged to the company. I, together with my team, went on a rescue operation. We entered the house and found Emily in one of the rooms. She was scared and exhausted, but alive. We quickly took her out and transferred her to safety. The company's management was arrested, and their financial shenanigans were exposed. Emily gave testimony that helped bring the perpetrators to justice. She was grateful for our help and started a new life, far from danger. After this case, my agency became even more famous. I received many proposals for cooperation and new clients, but I knew that the real purpose of my work is to help people and protect them from evil. Each new case was a new challenge. Sometimes they were simple, sometimes complex and dangerous, but I was always ready to go to the end to find the truth and protect the innocent. One day, a man named Alex came to my office. He looked worried and said that his daughter, Laura, had gone missing last week. He was afraid that she might be the victim of a crime and asked me to help him find her. I started by interviewing Laura's friends and acquaintances. They said that lately she had been very withdrawn and often left the house late at night. One of her friends remembered seeing her in the company of a man but did not know his name. Tom and I decided to check the places where Laura could appear. In one of the cafes, we ran into a bartender who remembered seeing her with a tall man who looked suspicious. He also said that this man often came to the cafe alone and always behaved strangely. We decided to follow this man. One evening, after he left the cafe, we followed him down a few streets into a dark alley. There he stopped and started talking on the phone. We couldn't overhear the conversation, but it looked suspicious. We returned to the office and began to analyze all possible options. I decided to call Laura, hoping she would answer. Instead, I heard a man's voice on the other end of the wire saying quietly, "She's with us. Don't try to interfere or you'll regret it." This call confirmed our fears. Laura was kidnapped and held hostage somewhere. We knew that time was against us. I reached out to my police contacts, and we began a search and rescue operation. One evening, we received information about an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. This place was known as a gathering place for criminal elements. We decided to check it out and found that it was guarded by armed men. We developed a plan to break into the warehouse. Tom and I took on the most dangerous part of the operation. We made our way inside and began to search the premises. In the basement, we found Laura, bound and frightened, but alive. We quickly released her and started to leave. At the exit from the basement, we were attacked by armed guards. A fierce firefight began. Tom and I were able to neutralize the attackers and get Laura to safety. We returned to the office where her father was waiting for her. Laura said that she was abducted because she witnessed an illegal transaction. She saw the same men transporting illegal goods, and they decided to get rid of her as a dangerous witness. Her testimony helped the police to arrest the organizers of the crime. After this incident, Laura and her father were finally able to return to a normal life. They were grateful for our help, and I felt like I had done another good deed. But I knew that new challenges would not make themselves wait long. Soon I had a new client, Sarah. She said her brother Ben disappeared after he began investigating the activities of a local criminal gang. He was a journalist and wrote articles about their illegal operations. Sarah gave me Ben's laptop where all his research was saved. I began to study the files and realized that he was very close to uncovering a large criminal scheme. This explained why he disappeared. Someone wanted to keep him quiet. I started checking Ben's contacts and found several people he had been in contact with before he disappeared. One of them, Tommy, recalled seeing Ben meet a suspicious man in a bar. This man looked very dangerous. I headed to the bar where Ben was last seen. The bartender remembered seeing him with the same man and that they were talking about something very serious. He also mentioned that this man often comes to the bar but never leaves any traces. I decided to follow this man. After a few days of surveillance, I realized that he was working for the same criminal group that Ben was investigating. I began to collect more information about him and his activities. After gathering enough evidence, I handed it over to the police. They conducted an operation and arrested several members of the group. During interrogation, one of them admitted that Ben had been kidnapped and was being held in an abandoned warehouse outside the city. We organized a rescue operation and went to the warehouse. There we found Ben, who was bound and badly beaten, but alive. We quickly took him out and took him to the hospital. His life was saved, but he was treated for injuries for a long time. Thanks to Ben's testimony and the evidence collected, most of the gang members were sentenced to long prison terms. Ben returned to his journalistic work, but now he was more careful and no longer risked his life so lightly. After this case, my reputation as a private detective was strengthened even more. I received new cases and continued to help people find truth and justice. Each new business was a challenge, but I was ready for any challenge. One day I was approached by a woman named Kate. She said her husband Richard was found dead in their home. The police thought it was an accident, but Kate was convinced it was murder and wanted me to do an independent investigation. I headed over to Kate's house and began inspecting the crime scene. At first glance, it all looked like an accident, but a few small details troubled me. I found marks that indicated a struggle and realized that Kate might be right. I started checking Richard's circle of acquaintances. One of his friends mentioned that Richard had a conflict with some people over business. These people were known for their cruelty and may have had a motive for murder. I decided to investigate Richard's business. It turned out that he was dealing with rather dubious partners who were engaged in illegal activities. I began to suspect that he was killed because of a business dispute and decided to find more evidence. One of Richard's partners, Mark, looked particularly suspicious. I decided to talk to him and learn more about their business. Mark was very careful with his words, but I felt he was hiding something. I continued my investigation and found some documents that indicated that Mark was involved in fraud and money laundering. This evidence was sufficient to contact the police and demand a second investigation. Thanks to the collected evidence, the police opened a new investigation and arrested Mark. During interrogation, he admitted that he killed Richard because of a business conflict. He tried to disguise it as an accident, but our efforts exposed his crime. Mark was sentenced to life in prison, and Kate was finally able to find peace knowing that her husband's killer had been punished. She was grateful for my help and support during this difficult time. Each new case brought new challenges and tests, but I was ready for any difficulties, knowing that my work helps people find truth and justice. A prosecutor once approached me. He said that a key witness in an important case disappeared right before the court. A witness named Julian had to give important evidence against an influential criminal, and now his life was in danger. I began my investigation by interviewing Julian's loved ones. They said that he had recently been very frightened and often changed his place of residence. I decided to check all possible places where he could hide. During my search, I came across a man who said he saw Julian in the company of suspicious people. He was sure that those people were working for the criminal against whom Julian was supposed to testify. This confirmed my fears that he had been kidnapped. I continued to investigate and learned that Julian had a mysterious patron who helped him hide. I decided to find this patron and find out where Julian might be. After a long search, I found him and received information about the possible whereabouts of the witness. I went to the abandoned house where, according to the information, Julian could be. I cautiously entered and found him bound and frightened. We quickly left the house and returned to the office, where the prosecutor was waiting for him. Julian testified in court and the criminal was convicted. His testimony was crucial, and without it, the criminal could have escaped punishment. The prosecutor was grateful for my help, and Julian was finally able to find peace. After this incident, Julian decided to change his life and start from scratch. He moved to another city and started a new job. I was glad I could help him and make the world a little safer. One day, a man named Peter came to my office. He looked very worried and asked for help to find his missing sister, Anna. She disappeared a few weeks ago and the police couldn't find any trace of her. I began my investigation by interviewing Anna's acquaintances. They said that recently she had been receiving strange calls a lot and seemed scared. One of her friends recalled seeing her with a stranger a few days before she disappeared. I decided to find this stranger and find out what he knew about Anna's disappearance. After a few days of searching, I ran into him at a bar. He was very careful with his words, but I felt he was hiding something. I began to follow the stranger and found out that he works for one of the local criminal organizations. This confirmed my suspicions that Anna might have been the victim of a crime. I decided to continue my investigation and find more evidence. One evening, I saw a stranger meeting several men in a dark alley. They were talking about something very serious, and I decided to follow them. Suddenly, they noticed me and started running away. I ran after them, hoping they would lead me to Anna. After a long chase, I found their hideout in an abandoned warehouse. They kept Anna bound and frightened there. I quickly neutralized the guards and freed her. We returned to the office where Peter was waiting for her.